So Jack, Jim, congratulations again, and thank you for your exemplary leadership and those inspiring remarks. If we were together in person, this would be the moment when I would hand you the awards and we'd have a great photo op. So the Zoom shots are going to have to do, I'm afraid. But hopefully it would be delightful if you can join us next year again when we'll be in person so that we can meet in person. I know that folks are really interested to learn more about how business leaders like you are drawn to support social justice and racial equity. We know that we've been living through extraordinary times. And for some of us, made even more so by where we're located, like you, Jim, in Minneapolis. But seeing the business community step up to support their employees, the communities in which they live and work, and even partners like NLADA and our legal aid and public defense members has truly been gratifying during this time. Statements are important, but what has been so impressive as I've had an opportunity to talk to you each and get to know you a little bit has been the actions that you've put behind the statements that organizations have, like yours, have made. And your very sincere commitment to racial equity and social justice. So Jack, as we've been talking about all evening, the last 2 years really is brought much change to the country. We face the pandemic, economic uncertainty, social instability brought on by the racial reckoning in our country that continues today. Your company has been leading in responding to these issues, especially in the context of racial equity. Can you describe some of that activity and what motivated you and American Family Insurance to take on that difficult work?
Sure. Well, I'd start out, Joanne, and say thank you very much for the award. The award is, I'm here accepting the award, but truly our workforce of nearly 20,000 people really deserve a lot of the credit. So thank you to NLADA and to you personally as well. So this has been something that I guess has been important to me. I go back to early days, my kindergarten class. We had one African-American boy, his name was Herbie, who was in our class. And I saw things happening at a very young age that I didn't like and I didn't think was right. And I ended up being a counselor at a summer camp. And a lot of our kids that came to camp were social services kids through Dane County here in the Madison area. And so when I was in grade school, I saw it. When I was in high school, I saw it. And then when I started my career at American Family, there were just a lot of things that happened. American Family had a redlining lawsuit in the city of Milwaukee. And I was in Milwaukee. I came in to actually help with the consent decree that came out of that. And it was one of those things where I vowed, when I saw things happening, I vowed, if I ever run this company, I'm going to do things differently. It was one of those things that you say kind of in a smart way. But as I then rose through the organization and I got to the position of CEO, I realized, I could really make a difference in this work. And so, we started. I've been a CEO now for 10 years. 2011 is when I came in. And really, I have made it a point to take all the learnings that I've had around racial equity, justice issues, and actually get them inserted into the fiber of who we are, the corporate soul that we have. And so it hasn't been anything more than that, just a strong personal belief. And then as I found my voice around these issues of justice, of criminal justice reform and equity and things like that, I found that the vast majority of people around me felt the same way, thought the same things, and were right in lockstep. And so it's been a path for me personally and professionally that's been just tremendous. I could go on about the things that we do corporately to support this work, whether it's taking the board a few years ago down in Montgomery, Alabama for a board field trip to see Brian Stevenson, who's a friend of our brand, and to see the work he's doing down there, the Lynching Museum and the National Museum of Peace and Justice. And so our board is fully involved, our senior leadership is involved. And as we saw things happening this last year around the health crisis, the economic crisis, the racial crisis, it was a time for us to listen to what our employees were saying, what our communities were saying, and then to take action. So, and we've done that as an organization, and folks have done that personally as well. So it's something very deep in we call it our corporate soul. And it's something that as I look at retirement at the end of this year, I think will extend far beyond my years with American Family.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So Jim, same question to you. What about what has motivated you and U.S. Bancorp to address racial equity in your work?
Thanks, Trent. And let me just thank you and NLADA as well for this opportunity to represent the organization and to serve on a panel with Jack. I'm truly honored to be here. So I would say, obviously, the landscape of the last few years has definitely been challenging, and we're doing our best to be responsive to that. I think our motivation comes from the fact that banking really is a community-based business. Historically, if you think about it, banks have always been the cornerstones of the communities in which they operate. And it's critically important that we continually respond to, invest in, and really take care of our communities. Our success, as we think about it, depends on having healthy and thriving communities, and communities that are, among other things, just and equitable. So these conditions that we're talking about certainly brought more urgency to our efforts, and with a much sharper focus on racial equity. As everybody knows, the killing of George Floyd occurred right here in Minneapolis, which is our corporate hometown. It happens to be my hometown as well. I live right in the city and not far from where it happened. So the aftermath has been very difficult. There's been a lot of pain and trauma in our community, particularly for our Black community members. And the social and the economic inequalities have really been laid bare. We've all had a wake-up call. We shouldn't have needed one, but nonetheless, we've had one, and we're trying to view it as an opportunity to learn and grow and to do better and really be better. So the recent events have taught us all we have a lot of work to do, and the corporate community is really no exception to that. We believe corporations can be change agents. They're looked to, I think, now more than ever for leadership and to make change. And the bar is being raised on all of us, and I think appropriately so. So, at U.S. Bank over the last year or so, we've announced a number of initiatives trying to do our best to address some of these social and economic inequities, and I'll just touch on a few of them. The first thing we did was commit to rebuilding and repairing some sites that we lost in Minneapolis in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing and the unrest, to make sure that we could continue serving those communities, and we've done that over the last year. We also created a new fund, a $15 million fund through our foundation, the U.S. Bank Foundation, to make grants and address systemic economic and racial inequities in small business, affordable housing, workplace development, things like that. We pledged to commit $100 million annually in capital to Black-owned and Black-led businesses and organizations. And then more recently, we announced something called U.S. Bank Access Commitment. That's a long-term series of initiatives to try to specifically address the racial wealth gap, which we think we can play a role in as a bank and a financial institution, and that involves supporting businesses owned by people of color and trying to enhance their career opportunities. And the first launch of that program is a $25 million commitment, a micro business fund for businesses owned specifically by women of color. And we hope to touch some 30,000 micro businesses over the next 3 years. We've also been involved in some things with our regulatory community. Banking, obviously, highly regulated. Our lead regulator, the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, last year launched something called Project Reach, where they are working to try to identify and reduce barriers to capital and credit, something we've been involved in. As well, there have been some initiatives within the industry. So our lead trade association, called the Bank Policy Institute, coalesced a number of leading institutions last year to produce recommendations for banks specifically to try to improve outcomes in minority communities, and that was announced last September. So those are some of the things going on at the corporate level. Within my department, the law division, we're also doing some things. Maybe I'll just mention a couple of them, and trying to build on some of the unique work we've been doing as a legal function. So for example, over time, we've been working very hard on diversity, equity, inclusion. both within our department with our law firm partners and the broader legal profession. And that has to do with recruiting, hiring, and retention of more diverse professionals. The legal profession is not as diverse as it should be. It frequently ranks last, not first. And in my humble view, it should be first for it to be about things like equity and justice. So last summer, we launched a separate standalone program apart from our diversity, equity, inclusion effort, although related to it, focused very specifically on equity and racial justice. And we did that intentionally to give it its own emphasis and visibility. And the purpose of that is for us to try to advance equity and racial justice, stand against racism, work together, try to foster change both within our department and the broader legal profession. And we've got a couple different focus areas: continuous learning, which is things like speakers, learning opportunities on topics of racism and anti-racism, some pro bono work targeted to things like policing, police reform, housing, voting rights, volunteer projects, a good example of which there's a program at the University of Minnesota called Mapping Prejudice, which is a broad community effort to try to research and uncover racial covenants in property deeds and expose some of the structural racism in which that was present when Minneapolis grew up as the city it is today. So these efforts and programs are sort of early days still, but there's been a lot of enthusiasm for the work, which is very gratifying. It's been very well received, and it's just allowed for more awareness, more conversation, and more understanding, which is really the whole point. It's a learning journey for us, but one we're on trying to be better and do better. So maybe I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Terrific work. That's impressive. So Jack, how does the role of corporate social responsibility, equity, and inclusion fit into the business strategy of a large organization like yours? And how can it impact not only employees, but consumers and customers too?
Yeah, interesting. I get this question quite regularly in terms of American families' business strategy, because many of the types of things that Jim was just talking about, we are on the same track, whether it's, philanthropy. We've committed over $100 million over the next 5 years to these efforts, whether it's a livable wage. We announced and enacted last year a $20 an hour livable wage that I think will need to be increased as well. So, and many of the other commitments that we have, but really your question gets at the core to whether these efforts become a moment in time for us in the business world, or whether they become a movement that reshape who we are, how we think of our business, our business model, and what we think of our future going forward. The reality is, this next generation, Gen Z, is the most diverse generation of any generation that there's ever been. And so as you think about the needs of business, the needs of business strategy, and how it fits with diversity, equity, inclusion, justice issues, it is clearly an issue for business strategy. And if this is truly to become a movement, it needs to be embedded deeply into business strategy. So we've spent a ton of time over the last few years, not just since the pandemic, not just since the economic situation, not since George Floyd, but far before that, talking about how demographic shifts are going to be impacting organizations, how diversity, equity, inclusion, justice fits into that. And we've then run the numbers. We've done experiments to see how our more diverse teams operate compared to non-diverse teams, and it's just clear that better business results come from more diverse teams, and so that then feeds into business strategy and feeds into types of goals that we have around business strategy. So when we think about our strategy and our goals at American Family, I mean, we have three main goals. One of them is a revenue goal, and then there's a lot of sub goals underneath that. But there's a clear top of the house revenue goal. There's a clear top of the house profitability goal, financial standing as an organization, and there's a clear people goal. And that people goal becomes an enabler for us to be able to hit the revenue goals and the profit goals that we need as an organization. So, the day of this becoming something that's separate and away from business strategy for our company, and I think for most companies, and I think that's one of the real wake-up calls this last year, is I think over. That the war on talent is done. Talent has won, and if you want diverse talent, if you want an inclusionary environment in your organization, it requires that you have attention to these types of people issues and a people balance, that you mirror the marketplace that you operate. And so I think that's the key for us, is marrying these financial goals and revenue goals with our people goals, and understanding that when you get to the end of the month or the end of the quarter and you talk about what your revenue has done and you talk about what your profitability is, you also talk with the same amount of time and effort around what your people goals are and your people balance, and you start measuring yourself that way. And as you do that, you see how intertwined it is and how connected and actually how much better your business results are when you have a strategy that incorporates these issues at their foundational level. So, we've done a lot of things to support customers over the last year. We were first to come out with pandemic relief. We gave over $500 million in relief to customers as we saw auto usage decline last year. We saw lots of things that we did around our workforce base that we supported as well, and all of it fits to being better in the community. But there's a bottom line business result to this that drives other business results that we have as well. So I'd say, Joanne, that it's just tied completely to strategy, and that if you can tie it to strategy, if you believe that, and if you tie it with your strategies, your strategic focus areas, and your metrics, you measure it through metrics, it will become more of a movement within your organization, as opposed to another moment that happens and now we wait for the next moment to happen and then the next moment. So that's how we look at it in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and business strategy.
So back to you, Jim. A natural extension of the way businesses advance corporate social responsibility is by helping to advance access to justice, access to legal assistance. NLADA has been working with our corporate partners to find policy priorities where collaboration can advance access to justice in the United States, and quite frankly, beyond at times. These have included efforts to preserve and increase federal funding for civil legal aid and public defense, including the recent letter that you signed with other general counsel across the country to increase funding for the Legal Services Corporation. Can you share why you think the corporate community has a role to play in efforts such as those?
Sure, thanks, Joanne. It's a great question. I personally think the corporate community and the in-house legal community in particular have a big role to play with respect to advancing justice, and an increasing role, frankly. And personally, I feel a special responsibility in this, for one, as a corporate leader with a platform, but also as a lawyer and somebody who represents the legal system. As I was discussing earlier in the first question, our communities are really the core of our business, and our success depends on these healthy and thriving communities, and communities that enjoy justice and equity. And civil legal aid and public defender offices are critical to those kinds of communities. They work with and support our most vulnerable citizens, and often in very difficult, life-changing situations. Just to take civil legal aid as an example, they might help in areas such as housing, immigration, family law, veterans benefits, the aftermath of natural disasters, things like that. And without that kind of help, without adequate help, people can experience devastating outcomes that create hardship, undermine stability, not only for themselves, but their families, businesses as well. And ultimately, I think the broader economy, if I can extend it out that far. And unfortunately, though, funding lags for these programs. There are just too many cases, too many potential clients, and not enough resources, just stated simply. And the needs have only been increasing during the pandemic, and we've seen that all over the place. So I think we have a big role to play in promoting adequate funding and just, trying to ensure access to justice. And, as one example, as you mentioned, Joanne, annually a group of us general counsels have signed a letter to Congress to support increased federal funding for the Legal Services Corporation. That's an easy enough thing for us to do. Hopefully it's been helpful. I think it has. We can also help locally. For example, US Bank, my company, is a supporter of Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid right here in Minneapolis, where I serve on one of the boards, and we work to galvanize financial and other support, both from the legal community, but also the corporate community for MMLA and its work. As well, we also try to support the lawyers in these kinds of organizations as part of the professional community. So for example, we often invite the MMLA lawyers to join us at US Bank for different programming and events that we do, things that we do within our legal department. Maybe just as one example, over the last couple of years, we've been invested significantly in lawyer well-being, trying to help our people stay physically and mentally healthy, which has been a big focus of the legal profession, appropriately so, over the last couple of years. And the pandemic has only exacerbated those concerns. So we've invited our friends at MMLA to join us in some of that work. Another avenue for the corporate community, I think, is the opportunity to extend private pro bono and other volunteerism further to equal justice. And just as an example of that, we at US Bank have a very strong corporate pro bono program. It was founded in 1998. I wasn't around then, so I can't take credit for it, although I'd like to. And it originated right here in the Twin Cities. It's since expanded nationally and even internationally. It's a great way for us to meet our professional obligation, but also to serve our communities. And it drives employee engagement, collaboration, team building. Nothing but good comes from it. It's really a great source of pride and strength for us. And our individual efforts can really have a big collective impact. So just looking last year at 2020, notwithstanding that we were all working remotely and in virtual environments, we were able to serve 26 different organizations. We put in over 1,400 pro bono hours at a value from our perspective of over $650,000. And we also made direct financial contributions to over 15 different organizations. As well, we're part of something called the Minnesota Corporate Pro Bono Council, something unique to us here in the Twin Cities, which is dedicated to furthering justice by engaging the in-house community in pro bono work. So we get together to meet, we share ideas, opportunities, we learn from each other, and we partner together on pro bono work. And then the last thing I would say is we are fortunate to be able to support different organizations, one of which I would cite is Equal Justice Works, which is an amazing organization. It's founded by law students in the late 80s, and the model for that is to have law firms and corporate legal departments support early career lawyers in doing public interest work on a 2-year fellowship. And since the late 80s, when it was founded, they've provided over 2,000 of those kinds of fellowships. And amazingly, to me, every time I hear this statistic, I'm amazed, but 85% of those fellows end up remaining in public interest work, serving their communities. So just some really nice success stories, and those are organizations that are easy for us to support.
Thank you, Jim. That's great. A lot of investment. So you are both equal justice champions, social justice champions, amazing leaders, and I thank you again for all you're doing. But if other members of the business community are listening to today's conversation who have not yet begun to partner with this extraordinary national community, including some of the many organizations that Jim just mentioned, either through NLADA's Corporate Advisory Committee or other organizations such as those, what would you say to encourage them today? Well, Jim, I'm going to start with you this time, and Jack, I'm going to give you the last word. What's your message to them, Jim?
Thanks, Joanne. I would say, come on in, the water's fine. The social justice needs are tremendous, as we've been discussing. They're all around us. It's really not hard to get started and to find organizations to support and to partner with and good work to do. It's really the right thing to do. It's also good business. as Jack has mentioned. And I would say, the bar is really being raised on us, the corporate community, by various stakeholders, whether they be employees, customers, shareholders, or others. And increasingly, they're asking us, what are you doing to have a positive impact on your communities, on broader society? What are you doing for the disadvantaged? Corporations and businesses are powerful. I think they can really be change agents. They're good. We're good at problem solving. Can't solve every problem, but we are good at tackling really difficult problems. We can also help, I think, at times fill a leadership vacuum, which sometimes can exist in certain ways and in certain spaces. There are challenges for sure in the current environment and with these issues. We live in sort of a 50-50 world. Depending on the issue or the question, you might find half the people on one side and half the people on the other. I think businesses naturally can tend to more risk aversion. We do not have unlimited resources, though I wish we did, but those to me should not be excuses. So when we partner with the NLADA and these other organizations, we really have a nice opportunity to make some change, and change that I think can improve the lives of individuals, of families, and communities. And in that process as well, we can change ourselves through learning, through growth, and through our own development. And to me, that opportunity is a real gift. And I feel humbled and I feel grateful to have an opportunity to champion equal justice with my voice, but also with the platform that I have and the resources at my disposal. And the last thing I would say, for me personally, this is the most rewarding professional work that I have the opportunity to do. And I would encourage members of the business community to seek out that same reward. And I would say you'll be glad you did.
Thank you, Jim. So for the final word for the evening, Jack, so we know how general counsel like Jim, they serve on legal aid boards or work with public defenders, and they often see firsthand how partnering with organizations like NLADA, can be critical to improving justice for all. But what message would you share with your fellow CEOs about the importance of partnering with legal organizations or organizations that work to advance justice? What would be your message to those individual leaders?
Joanne, that's quite a question. This is a complicated issue. It's very complicated. If you think that you're just giving a job to someone and you're not thinking about their safe and secure housing, you're not thinking about their transportation to the job, you're not thinking about the childcare, then you're not really going to be able to have much impact. So it's a very complicated issue, and because it's complicated, the need to partner with different organizations to create the awareness that you need around these different issues is just critical. And so partnering with your organization, other organizations that Jim just talked about is really important. And part of it's important because of the learning process that's involved in these diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice issues. The ability to get proximate. Brian Stevenson talks all the time about getting proximate and understanding, really walking in the shoes of those that you're trying to deal with. As your public defenders understand, until you actually do that, you don't really understand what people are going through. And so getting proximate, just key. And the process of listening to your workforce, listening to your vendors, listening to nonprofit partners you have, listening to your customers. And I think you see pretty quickly, this is not a left or right issue. It's not blue or red, Republican, Democrat. This is a question of humanity. It's a question of fairness. And so as I talk to other CEOs about how I got involved, I would agree with Jim. This is the most rewarding work that I've done in my career with American Family. As I talk to other CEOs, there's just a few things that I say you really need. You need ownership at the top. I mean, this is not something where a CEO should be looking to their vice president of diversity or some other leader and kind of handing off to that person this important work, because it really is tone at the top. and it needs to be at the top, and it needs to be championed by people at the top of the organization. So that's the first thing, is don't offload this to someone else. Take it on. And to Jim's point about come on in, you know, the water's fine. It's this idea of fear at the CEO level or senior leadership level, and fear of saying something wrong, doing something wrong, somebody taking something incorrectly. And I'd say, you know, address that head on, and address the fact that you're going to need some grace because you're going to make some mistakes, but that your intentions are a certain way. And I think if you address it that way clearly in front of people, and you talk about what you're trying to do, that if you have sins, they will be sins of action. They won't be sins of inaction. I think you'll get that grace that you need. And then the last thing that I say to the CEOs is something that I started with when we were talking about strategy. This has to be embedded in your corporate strategy at the highest level of the organization. You have to measure these results. You have to see how they're interconnected with your business results. And when they tie into your business results, it then becomes a lasting thing in your organization. I think that's the key for us going forward. Whether you're a business, whether you're a nonprofit, it's connecting these dots together to business results or organizational results. And as you do that, you start to see real momentum in the organization around these types of issues. So very complicated issue, but not one anybody should shy away from, because the reward, the personal and professional rewards are just unbelievable. As I'm speaking to the choir here, as you know.
Well, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you both. What wonderful spokespersons for justice. Thank you again for your time, for your true commitment to these issues and to justice. And congratulations again for your exemplary leadership. Thank you, and have a nice evening.